Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Happy Gita Jayanti, everybody. Today is the traditional day that they celebrate the speaking of the Gita on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. It's also Ekadasi. It's Mokshada Ekadasi. It's the Ekadasi that gives liberation. And so, although it's Christmas, we really wanted to be here with everybody and honor the Gita today. So thank you very much for joining us. I was thinking about breaking from the normal, our normal program of reading serially through the Gita to just focus on the most important teaching of the Gita. And I was going to give class on the most important teaching of the Gita. What do you guys think the most important teaching of the Gita is? It's an interesting question. It's not really open to interpretation. When you're dealing with a sacred text, or a contract, or a piece of literature, or even somebody's on the record testimony, an affidavit that somebody did, or a deposition that somebody did, you're no longer dealing with something which is infinitely morphable. You have defined parameters. They're speaking in a given language. They're following certain rules of syntax. And so it's not just, what do you think they mean? When you're dealing with something somebody has committed to, then there's a certain parameter. Maybe there's some room to interpret it this way or that way, but there's some pretty strong parameters that are set, especially if you're dealing with a book. You've got the words of the author right there, the considered words. It's different than a speech. In a speech, it's very common for people to say one thing and then modify it as they go on. You should never eat meat under any circumstances. Sometimes you may have to eat meat. If you're in a forest or in the Andes Mountains and there's nothing else to eat and you'll die of starvation, then in such a circumstance, you may have to eat meat. But in any other circumstance, you shouldn't, if it's at all possible to avoid. Do you guys follow that? That's a normal speech. You should never do this. Sometimes you might have to do this. You can say that and people won't go, you're crazy. You just said one thing to me and you've switched gears. People won't do that to you. They'll understand, oh, you made a statement. You spoke in an unequivocal way. It's spoken word. It was spoken unequivocally. But as you were speaking, you noticed that there was some detail you wanted to give. And so you gave a little nuance. And you offered a caveat, an exception to the rule you set up. In contrast to that, if you were to look at, let's say, a legal contract, it's understood that those types of casual, sensationalized or unequivocal or absolutist statements, those types of statements, if they occur, they're meant to be taken literally. Oftentimes in a contract, they'll say, this contract is enforceable and represents the sum and total of our understanding of this subject. And if for some reason some portion of the contract is deemed illegal, then the rest of the contract remains. They go so big that they tell you that they want to speak in as absolutist terms as possible. And then if they even include a clause in there that if for some reason some portion of the contract is ever deemed to be unenforceable, that the rest of the contract will stand. You see? So when you write something down, it might not be a legal contract, but it's a heck of a lot more in that direction than just a conversation. And so the Gita does have some elements of, it was a conversation, it was spoken, it's a song, it's a poem. There's some license for interpretation, but the language isn't infinitely morphable. And so it does set some pretty strong bookends on how you can interpret it. And although it's a conversation where God is speaking. And when you get a conversation where God is speaking, it starts to be more like a contract. Because it's understood that Krishna is not stumbling over his words and sensationalizing things and having afterthoughts and so on and so forth. Some of those things that we allow for people to have because we understand they're not omniscient and they're thinking things through on the spot, and that wouldn't be the case with an omniscient being speaking. It would be understood that what they spoke was pregnant with meaning and multi-layered and meant to be taken seriously. It's funny because sometimes Krishna will say, "Me matam," this is my opinion. But the opinion of an omniscient being is a lot different than just the opinion of Joe Schmo on the street. And so although the Gita is a conversation, a recorded conversation, a poem, it's also the word of God for the faithful. And as such, it's taken quite literally and quite seriously. It's put down for posterity's sake. And so, if you want to understand what the main teaching of the Gita is, it's pretty simple. There's a verse in the Gita where Krishna says, Iti te guhyatamam. Now he says, Iti te guhyamakyatam. Iti guhyataram akyatam. Somehow I'm losing my train of thought. It's been a long day, and my mind is not as on point as it should be. And so I'm struggling. Iti te I apologize. Iti te jnanam akyatam guhyataram maya. Thus I have spoken to you knowledge more advanced than the advanced, more secret than the secret, more confidential than the confidential. Vimrishatara sheshena yata ichasita takuru. Deliberate on fully and then do what you want to do. And then Krishna says, Sarvaguhyatamam bhuyaha shrinume paramam vachaha. Listen to me, to my supreme instruction, the greatest of all secrets, once again. So he uses the comparative. I've spoken to you knowledge more confidential than the confidential. The comparative is more. Like good, better, best, the comparative is better. Compared to the other, it's more. So it's more secret than the secret. That's guhyatara. But then this is guhyatama, the most secret. That's called the superlative in language. Again, we're not dealing with just nonsensical words. They're words in a particular grammatical construct that have a particular syntactical meaning. And so, I've spoken to you knowledge, this is literally, more advanced than the advanced. Deliberate on it fully. Do what you want to do. It seems like Krishna's closing the door and just leaving it up to Arjuna. And then he says, the greatest of all secrets, one more time, listen to my supreme instruction. And then he says, I'm speaking this because Ishto asi mejradhamiti tato vakshami teta. I'm speaking this for your benefit because I love you so much. And then he says, Manmana, think of me, Bhava Mad Bhakta Madhyaji Mam Namaskar. Think of me, become my devotee, worship me, offer your respects to me. Mame Vaisyasi Satyante Pratijane Priyosime. And I promise you, truly, you will come to me without fail. Sarvadharman priyaja mamekam sharanam braja. Just only surrender to me. Take shelter of me. Give up all dharma. Give up all dharma. Just surrender to me. I will liberate you from all difficulty. Do not fear. Sarva pape bhya mokshayisha mimam shuchaha. Aham tvam. I will liberate you from all fear. Do not worry. So, if somebody asks what's the greatest secret of the Gita, the highest teaching of the Gita, the supreme instruction of the Gita, there's no debate because Krishna says, this is my supreme instruction, this is my greatest teaching. And in fact, it's the only verse in the Gita that he repeats twice. Therefore, when he says, I'm going to say it again, it's clear. And what's the verse? It's to become a devotee. Bhava mad bhakta. Become my devotee. Be my devotee. It's an imperative. Be my devotee. Sometimes they say, feel the bhav. It's kind of like a popular statement. It's bhav. That means feeling. Bhava means be. Two different words. Bhava and bhava. Bhava, they have the same root, bhu, which is the verbal root, the infinitive verbal root, to be. But bhava is like one's feeling or one's being in the sense of feeling or sentiment or emotion. It has different meanings as well, but that's the primary one. Bhava means existence or beingness. And so when you say bhava mad bhakta, it literally means be my devotee. It's an instruction. Bhava mad bhakta. Be my devotee. Be my bhakta. That's the greatest teaching of the Gita. How do you know? Because Krishna says it's his greatest teaching. Twice. That's how you know. So that's not up for debate. So I was thinking about talking about that for the class, and I just did for a moment. But I thought instead what we would do is we would look serially at the Gita. We would find something quite astounding. I think it was Krishna's arrangement that today was the day that Gita Jayanti fell on, and we were where we were in the text. It was a special text we're about to read in the Gita. So if we're going to look at the 7th chapter, the 7th chapter gets into theology. And Krishna explains don't look at your books. Krishna explains that he's the source of everything, spirit and matter. He gives you some examples so you can understand how to see the material world in relationship to him. He tells you he's even beyond this world, not merely a pantheistic deity, but instead he's a panentheistic deity, both immanently as well as transcendently existent. He tells you the way to understand him is through grace. And he tells you about the kind of people who are unreceptive to grace and the kind of people who are receptive to grace. And within the kind of people who are receptive to grace, he even gives you a hierarchy. Or the person who is assiduously searching after knowledge, the jnani, that person's the best. And eventually they surrender to him. And you wonder, if you don't surrender to the Supreme Being, what do? You surrender unto other deities. And this brings up, and it's a common theme amongst monotheists. If you talk to a Muslim or a Jew, and when I say a Muslim or a Jew, I mean a serious Muslim or Jew. Like somebody who is extremely faithful. Those people, they don't really have fear. They believe that God's in charge and whatever happens is God's arrangement. And they live a life where they don't really have any fear of anybody. Because they believe in an omnipotent, primal source of everything. So, if you talk to like my favorite UFC fighter, Khabib Nurmagomedov, every time he says, "Are you going to win this fight?" Yeah, I'll win, inshallah, if God wills it. And then you won the fight. How do you feel? Allah willed it. Mashallah, God willed it, so I won. Like every time he wins a fight, it's because God willed it. Every time they ask him if he's going to win a fight, he says, I don't know. If God wills it, I'll win. There's this sentiment amongst people, even people who are not of my particular persuasion. I mean, the Muslims killed 100 million Indians over a 1,000-year reign, so they're not exactly our buddies, but they are monotheists. And so you talk to a serious Christian or a serious Jew or a serious Muslim, there's a certain confidence, faith, fearlessness that they have towards the world because they know that Krishna's in charge of everything. And the wheels of justice grind slowly, but they grind infinitely fine. And they understand that there's fairness and justice and mercy in every nook and cranny of the world. If you don't believe in a supreme being, then maybe you do the polytheistic thing. Or, more or less, you do the polytheistic thing as an atheist, where you try to satisfy your boss and your government and your this and your that. You try to water all the leaves on the tree because you don't think there's a root which connects all the leaves. Therefore, you have to water all the leaves, and those leaves may be, Justin Bieber and Billie Eilish, and to speak across a couple of micro generations. And it may be, the government and the police and your boss and your parents and your friends, and you got to juggle and satisfy everybody, and you're trying to make it all work. Or it could be that you believe in a bunch of different polytheistic deities and you offer a little bit of water to each one of them, and you figure, well, if I'm going to take a trip, I got to talk to like the patron saint of travelers, and if I'm going to, if you're a Catholic, and I got to go to this patron saint of this and the patron saint of that, and I got to light a candle for this one and light a candle for that one. Or you might just be like a straight up pagan Roman, where you've got to supplicate to the god of water and the god of fire and the god of this and the god of that. And they're all sort of vying for control, and they all have influence over you, and they could all mess you up, and so you need to supplicate to them. Or maybe you got a king, and you got your lords that own part of your land, or own your land you farm on, and then you got your kings, and you got to supplicate and pay homage to all of them, and you got to balance it all and figure it out and make your way with all these different, feudal lords ruling your reality, all of which have influence and can make or break you. Most people live in a world like that. It's an atheistic world. It's a polytheistic world. Whether they even believe in God or not doesn't matter. They believe there's like these many, if you really think about it, like always the demigods, they are the personification of the various forces of the world. Whether it's the rain and lightning on one hand, and fire and the sea. You follow? So it could be, or it could be, that they're, responsible for, gravity and time and justice. Like our Lord of Death is usually the justice giver. Whether it's Hades or whether it's Yama. And so you get these deities who are in charge of all the things you experience on a daily basis. We might have, given up those beliefs in elemental lords, personifications of the elements per se. But we still bow to different masters and dance to the beat of a variety of drums and try to satisfy people. Monotheism is ultimately about letting go of that delusion and understanding that there's one ring to rule them all. There's a simplicity in the elegant sense of the term simplicity. There's a sobriety to the whole thing. It's much less frantic, like a chicken running around with its head cut off, or a little bird running around to try and pick up a bunch of kernels from all over the floor. There's a certitude a sobriety, a calm, a steadiness, a depth that comes from monotheism, that comes from the realization that there's one thing that controls everything. There's one cynosure. There's one center of the whorl, of the lotus. If you don't go that route, then what you end up doing, you end up surrendering to all these other gods. And ultimately it's Krishna who's in charge of all that, but you don't get that, so you're running around and you end up with temporary fruits and a lack of certitude and surety and confidence and calm and peace, and you're very much afraid. Srila Prabhupada's birth name was Abhay Charan. One who is fearless, having taken shelter at the feet of God. Chara means feet. Abhay means fearless. Bhai means fear. Abhay means fearless. And Abhay Charan means fearless at the feet of God. His guru just tweaked his name, because it's such a good name. So his guru just tweaked his name a little bit. Abhay Charan Aravinda. Aravind means lotus. So the one who's fearless, having taken shelter of the lotus feet. And so he just added an honorific onto Charan, and it became Charan Aravind, which means the lotus feet. One who's fearless, having taken shelter of the lotus feet. When you become a sannyasi, you give up that name you had. Prabhupada didn't give up that name. He called himself A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. That shouldn't be his name. His name should be Bhaktivedanta Swami. But Prabhupada refused to give up his birth name / initiation name. It was really the initiation name he didn't give up, because it was given to him by his guru. And so he kept it as AC. That's not what sannyasis are supposed to do. They're supposed to renounce their purvanam, their previous name, and take on a new name. And Prabhupada did that, but he kept the AC to honor his initiation name. And some of his sannyasi colleagues gave him heat about it, but he didn't care. He kept it. He fearlessly kept it, right? He didn't fear their critique. So Krishna explains how he's the source of everything, gives you examples of how you can look in this world, explains that he's transcendent as well as immanent, explains that people can't understand him except by grace because he's actually beyond the world. Therefore, it's not possible to build a stairway to heaven. You require grace or some sort of divine input to make it happen. Then you're left wondering, well, why wouldn't everybody do it? And then he explains how certain types of people are just unreceptive and other people are receptive, and then within those receptive people, how you should be receptive, and who the most receptive person is, the jnani. And then he explains the contrast to that, which is that you end up surrendering to many gods and the problems with that. You follow? And that's how we get to where we are in the Gita. And then there's this very important verse, it's text 24. And that's what I want to spend some time discussing today, text 24. He says, Vyaktam, avyaktam, vyaktim, apanam. Ap means to attain. Avyaktam vyaktim apanam. Manyate mam abudayaha. What does buddhi mean? Intelligence. What does buddha mean? One who has intelligence. What does abudayaha mean? Of those who have no intelligence. For those who have no intelligence. Those who have no intelligence, abudayaha, those people who have no intelligence, manyante, they think. What do they think? Mam, they think about me. What do they think about me? that avyaktam vyaktim apanam. They think that I was avyakta and I have become vyakti. Avyakta means impersonal. It literally means unmanifested. But the term is used by Krishna in the Gita to describe an impersonal revelation of God, of divinity. He speaks about those who consider the deity to be avyakta, anirdesh, undefinable, and unmanifested. And sarvatragam, present everywhere. And so he uses this language, avyakta, to describe. He uses language to describe people who have an impersonal conception of divinity. Avyakta means unmanifested, impersonal. Vyaktim doesn't just mean manifested. Vyakti means a manifest person, someone who possesses the quality of being manifested. It's a person. Like yoga is a thing, yoga, but a yogi is one who does yoga. A vyaktim is a person, a manifested individual, a person who possesses, who exists, who is manifested. Unintelligent people think that previously I was unmanifested and I have achieved this identity as a manifested person. You look confused. Unintelligent people think that I am fundamentally unmanifested, but I've achieved this secondary nature as a manifested person. That God in the ultimate issue is unmanifested, is indefinite. There's any number of problems with this. How do you get manifested people from an unmanifested deity? What would cause that unmanifested deity to become manifest in the first place? There must be some quality of manifestation inherent within the deity. There are any number of logical, like serious contradictions with this worldview, that a manifest world comes from a fundamentally unmanifested deity. You follow? There's any number of problems. But to some extent, I don't really care about those today. I want to look at what Krishna says in the Gita. Krishna says, unintelligent people. Now, previously he said alpamedas. Alpamedas means less intelligent people. He says, people who are hritagyana, whose intelligence is stolen, who are alpamedas, who have less intelligence, they surrender to many gods. People who have no intelligence think that fundamentally the absolute is unmanifested, is impersonal, and it's become as a secondary modification or a secondary a secondary evolution has become manifested. But in the highest instance, it's unmanifested. But it's sort of devolved into manifestation. You follow? It's a very heavy verse. Avyaktam, unmanifested. Vyaktim apanam, achieving the nature of a manifested being. Manyate, they think. Abudaya, people with no intelligence think this about mom, about me. Param bhavam ajananto, they don't know my supreme nature. Param bhav, there's that word bhav again. Param bhav, my supreme existence, my supreme nature. Param bhavam ajananto mama avyayam anuttamam. My supreme nature, which is the highest, anuttamam, means the highest, and it is avyayam, inexhaustible, eternal. So, param bhavam ajananto, mama Mam avyayam anuttamam. They don't know my supreme nature that is eternal and the most refined. So if you were going to read it in English, you would say something like this. People with less intelligence, whose knowledge has been stolen, surrender to various demigods, and I have to help them along the way with that, because even then I'm still the source of everything. But then people with no intelligence take it a step further, and they think that actually the absolute is impersonal and has only become secondarily manifested as a person. They don't understand my supreme nature as the Supreme Lord, standing in front of you, having a conversation with you as a person, and that this is my eternal and highest, most refined manifestation. Cool verse, right? This verse by itself puts to rest. There's a few other places in the Gita where Krishna does stuff similar to this, and sometimes more elaborately. But this verse by itself is Krishna's first full-fledged attack on impersonalism, where he names impersonalism and he critiques it. And it's interesting that it occurs right alongside demigod worship. This happens again in the 9th chapter, where he lumps together impersonalism with demigod worship. It happens again in the 9th chapter. And Krishna critiques impersonalism again in the 12th chapter and 15th chapter and 18th chapter. Not 12th and 15th chapter. And in the 18th chapter he also explains that, loving him is higher, is the highest. Being a devotee to him personally is the highest. It comes up again in the 14th chapter. It does occur in a number of other places. But this is the first really wholesale critique of impersonalism. Less intelligent people worship demigods. They don't have the peace of the monotheist. And like I said, this peace really belongs to anybody who has a conception of a supreme source of everything, whatever name they wish to call it by. You find this is a common feature of Judaism and Christianity and Islam and any other minor monotheistic faiths that might be out there. Judaism is really a minor faith at this point. There's 13 million Jews. There's, 2 billion Muslims and 3 billion Christians. So, the numbers of Muslims to Jews, you're talking about literally, 150 times? And with the Christians, it's more like 225 times. The numbers are staggering, actually. For every Jew on the planet, there's 150 Muslims and 225 Christians. Why do they even get mentioned? They're less than a fraction of a percent. It's because they're the parent tradition. They were the first monotheistic tradition of the Middle East, and so all the other traditions come from them. That's why they always get mentioned as one of the great world religions, even though they're microscopic in terms of numbers. And you take a world religion class, I might study Judaism, but there'd be no need. You'd be just as good to study the Baha'i faith or something like that, or the Mormons, There's plenty of other traditions. There's Zoroastrian. There's plenty of there's older traditions, and there's plenty of other traditions that have more membership. So why do they get so much attention? Because they're the Genesis, which is, of course, the name of the first book of the Hebrew Torah. So you find here, there's a certain faith that these monotheistic people have, and then otherwise you descend into polytheism, and those people are less intelligent. But the no intelligent people here are the people who think that ultimately a manifest person like Krishna came out of an unmanifested absolute, which is the highest. It's like what came first, the chicken or the egg. So any good Indian pundit of religion will tell you that, both impersonalism and personalism exist. They'll just say that impersonalism is the highest manifestation. Even if you go to like a regular old yoga class and you meet a yogi who's read a little Eckhart Tolle or something like that, they'll try and bust this out on you. They'll say it's all one. And that's a cool thing to say. But how do you get many from one if the one doesn't contain within itself variety? Why would many come from one? It would be an adulteration of the one. Where did that adulterating principle come from? Then they'll start to say, well, the one wanted to know itself. As soon as you say the one wanted to know itself, now you have a personal deity that just created the world. And you can't get rid of the personhood of the one. But usually when people are talking about the one, they mean that God is a force devoid of the features of individuality, such as consciousness and will and a desire and love. But yet you end up using that very terminology to explain why the one became many. And so what we have is the one is filled with desires and unfulfilled desires and needs and wants and so on and so forth, and the power to accomplish them. And the world came from that. And that starts to sound a lot like the God, the Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and the Hare Krishnas. So within Indian philosophy, you have this real strong divide between personalism and impersonalism. That impersonalists hold that although there is a manifested deity of Krishna, higher than that, as the origin of that, is an unmanifested, impersonal force, devoid of any variety or any specificity whatsoever. It's a fully homogenized absolute. And somehow we got from here to here, and that's the problem, is how do you get from point A to point B? Irrespective of those logical difficulties or impossibilities or insuperable problems that plague an impersonal starting point. What I want to focus on here is it's not what Krishna is teaching. So if you want to teach that, you're not teaching the Gita. And it's amazing that Krishna, when he introduces his first critique of impersonalism, it's right on the heels of worshiping demigods, and it's worse. They're less intelligent. These people have no intelligence. You go from alpa medas, which means medas means mind stuff, intelligence. Alpa means small. And then you go from that to abudaya, no intelligence whatsoever. And those completely unintelligent people, what do they think? They think that originally I was unmanifested and I'd become this manifest person, Krishna. They don't understand my supreme nature as this manifested person. Therefore, my supreme teaching is to surrender to me because I'll help you. And you need grace in order to conquer over the world. And I can provide you that grace because I'm a person who can think about you and help you and assist you and stand for you. And you can trust me. And so really the core of bhakti is to see God as a person, a loving, powerful person that you can trust. In a trusting relationship, there's a trustor, you give trust, and the trustee, the person that is entrusted, and the trustor gives up power or control and allows the trustee to take charge. And you can't control everything, so you have to find people you can trust in life. And Krishna is introducing himself as a trustee. He's trying to make a case that we should trust him, that we should have a relationship with him, that we should love him, that he's interested in developing that relationship with us. He's making a case. The whole Gita is Krishna making a case. Really, the Gita is a poem. It's a love poem from Krishna to us, where he's asking us to let him jump in and help out. Can't force his way in. But he can do everything but. And so he really puts himself in harm's way, becomes Arjuna's charioteer, his chauffeur, gives him phenomenal advice, runs the gamut with him, A to Z, talks about everything under the sun, connects it all together beautifully, and brings it all back to just like a very, very simple equation. Krishna wants to help, is capable of helping. He's all good. That's why he wants to help. An all good deity wants to help. He's capable of helping. That's because he's all powerful. And you can trust Krishna. Turn your life over to Krishna. And that is the perfection of existence. It's a very simple teaching. Now, sometimes everybody says they have an all-good, all-powerful deity, but then when you sit there like, I'm a jealous God, don't put any other gods before me, and I'm going to smite you and smote you, and go kill the Jews after the rainy months have passed, or when the summer months have passed, go kill the Jews wherever you might find them. And you get these you get these pogroms, or you get these heathens, and you got to boil them in oil, and you got to burn them at the stake, and you got to wipe them out, and crusades and jihads, and you have a hard time really seeing the God of the Middle East as being an all-good deity. It's like all good in name only. In fact, dystheistic people critiquing dystheistic, an evil God, dystheistic position, they usually use the God of Christianity and Judaism. And atheists who want to attack religion usually use the God of Christianity and atheism. It's funny because a lot of times they don't even attack the notion of God. They attack this particular iteration of God, which is quite popular, and so it does work. But if you really want to be an atheist, you got to be against the absolute best conceived version of God, not the worst conceived notion of God. And so I think the Gita, puts forward a very, very compelling case for what an all-good, all-powerful deity would look like. I think it makes an excellent case for what that deity might look like. And you're left with this deity that wants to help you, doesn't want to compromise your free will, is capable of helping for you, is looking for you to give him a chance, is looking for you to trust him, professes his love to you, really goes above and beyond. And Krishna's just starting to dig in here to where people are really at. You're either surrendering to many gods, and although we don't have polytheists in droves these days, I do think the polytheistic disposition is there within atheism when people are supplicating to many different lords and trying to water many different leaves. So I do think it's alive and well, and there's a lot of value. But even worse than that attempt to supplicate is to think that everything was impersonal, and that's somehow the highest conception. Because of course then there's no grace. There's no consciousness. There's no individual. There's no personal relationship. There's no more trust. I guess you can use I trust the machinery will do its job, right? But that's different. That's different than the kind of trust you have in a person, where there's love and consciousness. When you say you're going to trust a machine will do its job, you mean that the machine was made properly by some person, and it was designed properly, and it's going to hold up. So that kind of trust in a piece of machinery isn't the kind of trust I'm talking about when I trust someone to look out for me, to have my best interest at heart, that someone's my well-wisher, that someone's my friend, that I can count on somebody. There's an emotional, personal component to that. And when you take away the personality of the deity, you really take away the possibility of loving the deity, the possibility of being devoted to the deity, the possibility of grace, which is really Krishna's love manifested back towards us, the love of an all-powerful being. All those things get evaporated with an impersonal conception. And so in a section of the Gita where Krishna's talking about bhakti, in a section where he's talking about what happens when people don't engage in bhakti, it's very, very telling that impersonalism gets treated right alongside the closet atheism of polytheism. And really polytheism becomes atheism. There's no ultimate controller, it's just a big game. Or it becomes monism, that there's one thing above everything else, but it has no personality. Polytheism doesn't really exist as a philosophy. It exists as a practical manifestation of how one lives their life practically in terms of trying to water many leaves. But if you talk to a philosophical polytheist, he'll either become an atheist or he'll become a monist. Did you follow this? And so it makes perfect sense that Krishna is going to critique this when he's really starting to dive into bhakti, because it represents an alternative position which is antagonistic to bhakti. Sometimes people don't understand why we're always harping against the impersonalists. One of Prabhupada's early disciples said, I couldn't figure out who these Mayavadis were. That's Prabhupada's chosen term, or actually our scripture's chosen term for impersonalists. He said, I wonder what these people had done to Prabhupada where he had such an axe to grind with them, because he was always harping on them and critiquing them left and right. I would wonder, why Prabhupada had it out for them, and what was their their little political schism or something like that. And he said, many years later, I realized we were all impersonalists, and Prabhupada was actually critiquing us and our worldview. When we get into this critique of impersonalism, it's not just our thing. It's right here in the Gita, and it's logical. You have to do this, because if you're going to have a loving deity, a trustworthy deity, a deity that you love and take shelter of and trust, it has to be a person. There's just no other way to do it. And if there's many different lords and none of them are in charge, you're never going to be able to give your love and heart to somebody, because you're always trying to water every leaf. There's no root. In contrast, you believe there is no tree, there is no root, there is no anything, everything is one. And then also the idea of a loving relationship, which means a lover and a beloved, bound together by this mutual affection, that's gone. In which case there's no bhakti. In which case there's no door in your heart opening for an influx of grace to help you do what you couldn't do on your own, which is to understand a deity which by his very definition goes beyond everything in this world. We understand Krishna. It's a miracle. We understand Krishna because Krishna is just that loving and powerful that he makes it possible. It's a revelation. It's a gift. You don't need material intelligence. You do, however, need the ability to focus very strongly, in a very one-pointed way, on what's really important. And it involves letting go of what's not important and stopping playing like a polytheist. And you find people who have walked this road, even if they're from different faiths, there's a certain calm and a certain peace and a certain confidence that you only find from monotheists in the world, because they've come home. They found the one place to go where everything is accomplished. They found the one thing which covers everything. They found the one answer which answers all questions. You follow? And they're peaceful. This is it's not a small thing. This is everything. Separate from Krishna's incredibly lovable personality and wonderful, breathtakingly beautiful pastimes, his breathtakingly beautiful form, separate from those beautiful accoutrements to our tradition, if we just distill it down to the essence, what are we saying? We're saying there's a source of all reality that is a person, that's conscious, that loves you, that's unlimitedly powerful. If you open the door, Krishna will, through grace, love you. He will love you, and that love, that compassion, is grace. Compassion is love towards someone who needs help. Grace is the compassion of the Supreme Being towards us. Therefore, it's just love manifested towards us who require assistance. Compassion is love manifested towards someone who's suffering. Grace is that same love as compassion, but from an infinite being. Therefore, it's unlimited compassion. Well, we have to open the door to that. We have to conceive of God as a person for that to occur. And we have to open our hearts up to that being who wants to help us. Polytheism is the enemy of such a conception because we're running around trying to dip our toes in a bunch of different lakes, not really believing in or trusting any of them, and trying to just manipulate things and water all the leaves of a tree. Impersonalism kills the very nature of love and trust, and therefore the nature of grace. It kills the relationship, the powerful, loving relationship with the deity, which supersedes all of our loving relationships in this world, makes them pale in comparison, but also it kills the possibility of like opening our hearts up to Krishna so he can fill them. So these ideas are the core of the spirituality of the Gita. They're the core of monotheism. They're the core of any tradition of grace. They're the core of any tradition where love and devotion are postulated, where there's a sense of eternal life, eternal love for the deity, eternal devotion to the deity. All these things depend on a personal conception of divinity and a supreme conception of divinity. Therefore, both impersonalism and polytheism must be dealt with. And here we find Krishna in the first chapter where he starts to lay out theology, deftly dealing with these things. And he's so brilliant, he kills impersonalism in a single verse. Offers us a scathing critique of polytheism, and impersonalism is even worse. So like whatever this, it's like, imagine if I said to you, Tukram's like, out of all of us, Tukram's like the weakest dude of everybody. He's like so weak. Right? And Rukta's even weaker. Your whole critique of me, let's say you spent 10 minutes critiquing me. You follow? And then you said, and Rukta's even weaker. Then all the critiques of me are true about him, and he's even worse. You follow? So like there were 3 or 4 verses there. Intelligence is stolen by lust. Anything you get from those demigods, you actually get from me. Like I have to make your fate strong. Like whatever you get is temporary from them. You don't even go to me, you go to them, right? They're less intelligent. Their intelligence is stolen. They're lusty. And the impersonalists have no intelligence. It's like everything was bad about those guys and more. And it might seem like Krishna has an axe to grind, just like it seemed to those early disciples of Prabhupada, like he had some axe to grind. But it's not actually the case. It's that these conceptions of divinity are fundamentally antagonistic towards the loving, graceful relationship Krishna is trying to establish with us. Therefore, he has to get rid of them. Forgive the example that comes to mind. But imagine if you're ministering to like some kind of prostitute or something like that. And then that prostitute assumes any kind of relationship you want to have with them is a sexual relationship. So they want to sexualize the relationship from the get-go because that's just what they've learned from the time they were a child, because of their job, whatever trauma they went through, whatever it was. They've learned that that's what it is, and that's the only time that people are going to be interested in them is when they can get some kind of sexual pleasure from them. You follow? Then you come along, you want to actually help this person. You're not looking to turn it into that kind of a sordid affair. You're not looking to have that kind of a relationship. You follow? And so the first thing you really have to do is just say, like, that doesn't work. We're not doing this. Don't do this. That's not what we're doing. We're going to have like a close relationship, an intimate relationship, a loving relationship, but it's going to be devoid of sex. It's going to be devoid of sexuality. It's going to be devoid of being sexed. You follow? Does that make sense? And because that person is so spun, you're going to have to repeat that to them over and over and over again so they don't twist it all up and get weird about it. Because that's all they've known. It's not gratuitous critiques. It's not an indulgent argument that Krishna is making. It's the absolute bare bones essentials which are needed to therapeutically cure somebody of the misconceptions which will ruin the possibility of having a healthy relationship. And therefore Krishna at the outset and repeatedly throughout the Gita needs to attack these positions because they are fundamentally antagonistic to and diametrically opposed to true bhakti. Do you follow this? You could imagine you want to adopt some, orphan, but they've been prostituted on the streets, and so they keep thinking that's where you want to go with them. You got to tell them, no, I want to be your parent. I don't want to do that. That's not what I'm looking to do. You have to put so much time into communicating this in so many different ways, so consistently, because otherwise they would twist up the whole thing. That's what Krishna's doing here with us. He's clarifying the core problems that stand in the way of us renovating and revitalizing our innate potential for a loving, intimate relationship of grace with God, of bhakti. Bhakti is like what we feel towards Krishna, and Krishna's bhakti for us, Krishna's love and devotion for us is manifested as grace. So our love up to Krishna is called bhakti. Krishna's bhakti down to us is called kripa or grace or mercy. It's the same basic love. And theologically the things that stand in the way of that are an impersonal conception and a many gods conception. And so they both have to be dealt with. And actually, to be honest, let's say you believe, let's just to run with this real quickly before we finish. Let's say you believe in God. Let's say you're a Catholic, you believe in God, but you're just super materialistic and you spend your whole life pursuing materialism. What that really means is that you think that material stuff is actually what's important. Therefore, you're really worshiping at the altar of materialism. You follow? And your lip service to, or your you're just kind of like your kind of like casual faith or your professed faith doesn't actually add up to a lot because fundamentally you're a polytheist chasing the corporate dream, chasing materialism, chasing material enjoyment as being the things you value the most. Therefore, you're deifying those things. And there isn't really room for Krishna to be at the top of the food chain. And so materialism, polytheism, worshiping at many altars, all this stuff has to be dealt with. Because it gets in the way and obfuscates and makes impossible like just a really strong relationship with Krishna, which is, and I'll finish with this, it gives you a lot of peace. It makes everything okay. It allows you to sleep peacefully at night. It allows you to be free from fear. You're no longer living in a chaotic world. You're no longer living in a dangerous world. You're living in a world where Krishna is holding you in his hand. The most powerful person in existence is holding you in their hand, helping you. If you mess up and you need to get some karma, it's because you messed up. It's not Krishna's fault. He doesn't want that for you. You're 100% responsible for whatever bad happens to you. And if you open the door, Krishna's going to give you more than you could ever imagine. And that more than you could ever imagine, you have no idea what that might look like. You just know it's like way better than whatever you thought was going to happen. You could imagine, if you went on a blind date, not a blind date, like a blind date not in the sense of the person you hadn't met, but a blind date in the sense of you don't know where you're going on the date. I don't know what you call that. Krishna's set up this amazing date. We're going to see the Northern Lights, and we're going to also see the Eiffel Tower, and we're going to also you know what I mean? We're going to also dive and find Atlantis. We're going to climb Mount Everest. It's all in one day. He's figured it out because he's all powerful. and all-knowing and omnibenevolent as well. He's got this amazing journey, this amazing adventure set up for us. And we just got to trust a little bit, not even blindly. Krishna makes his case. It's a reasonable case. At the end of this class, I'm not saying Krishna's blindly asking for our faith. He's just asking to open that door, and he's laying out a case for us. And he's telling us the things that are really going to mess up that date. It's like on this blind date, you're like, hey, pack a bag, make sure you bring some warm clothes and also some light clothes. You like say a few things, and like the things that are required. And so these are the things that are required for us to go on this amazing journey with Krishna. And at some point you're just left with this basic idea. I just don't trust Krishna. I just don't believe in God. Because properly conceived of, the deity we're talking about is definitely holding you in his hand. We don't understand this. And so when push comes to shove, a lot of us are just atheists. And we show it. We don't upgrade. We don't allow ourselves to be picked up. We don't allow ourselves to evolve. We don't allow ourselves to soar on wings like eagles. In a lot of ways, what's being done here is Krishna's asking us to let him work a miracle in our lives. And this conception that he's laid out, where you're no longer having an impersonal conception, and you're no longer believing in many deities, and you're believing that there is one supreme Lord above them all, that conception allows for the miracle to occur. And it's not even just our tribe. Other traditions that have this conception, they also participate in the same piece. They also have it. You see it. The same sobriety, certitude, peacefulness, conviction, fearlessness. It's what happens when you have a personal conception of divinity. It's what happens when you have a full and complete conception of divinity you commit to. All right, that's it. Merry Christmas to y'all. Thank you so much for weighing in on this special day. Gita Jayanti. Hare Krishna.